Today's lesson, I'm going to show you how to do this. Some people call this a moss stitch. Some people call it a seed stitch. It's got quite a few names, but it's a really pretty stitch for doing scarves, for doing cushion covers. You can do blankets with it, of course, as always. You can do blankets. There is no stitch count for this. Just do your chain the length that you want it. Use the hook size for the yarn that you're using. On the yarn label, it will tell you what size of hook to use. I'm going to show you how to do this pretty little moss stitch, seed stitch, whatever, rice stitch, whatever one that you want to call it. There is no stitch count for this. I'm going to do a slip knot. I'm just going to wrap the yarn around my fingers in a cross, put my hook under this one, and pull this one through. Now I've got the tail of the yarn in my hand, and then just pull this stitch and it goes on to your hook. If you can't do that, then just tie it on. We're going to do a chain. You can make your chain any length that you want. So into the second stitch in your chain, don't count that, that's your loop. You never count the loop on the hook. 1 and 2, and do a single crochet. You're going to do 1 single crochet all the way along your chain. 1 into each stitch. So I'm going to chain 1 and turn. And I'm going to single crochet into the very first stitch. Chain 1, skip a stitch and single crochet into the next stitch. Chain 1, skip a stitch and single crochet into the next stitch. All the way along. Chain 1, skip 1 and single crochet into the next. Chain 1, skip 1 and single crochet. Chain. So I'm at the end, I'm skipping 1 and I'm going to do a single crochet, do my single crochet into that last stitch. For this one we're going to chain 2, 1 and 2. That is your single crochet and chain 1. You're going to skip this stitch here and you're going into the chain space with a single crochet. Chain 1, skip the stitch and go into the chain space. Remember you done a chain 1 and you skipped a stitch on the last row. So that's where we're working. We're working into those chain spaces in between your stitches. You've got your chain space here. So chain 1, skip the stitch and go into the chain space. Chain 1, skip the next stitch and go into the chain space. All the way along, chain 1, skip the stitch and go into the chain space. Chain. So at the end you're going to chain 1 and you're going to go into the last stitch on that little area there, into that last stitch. That was your chain 1 of that last row, and do your single crochet. You're going to chain 1, 2 and turn, and again you're going to skip the stitch and work into the chain spaces. So every row now you'll work into that chain 1 space. So skip that stitch and work into that chain space. Chain 1, skip the stitch and go into the chain space. Remember, in chain 1 first, skip and work in the chain space. We're going to always be working in the chain spaces, not the top of the stitch. So if you stretch it out, you've got a stitch, you've got a chain space, and you've got a stitch. and a chain space. It's these spaces we're working in. Chain 1 and go into the next chain space. Chain 1, so your chain 1, skip 1 and into the space. Chain 1, skip that stitch, into the next one. Chain 1, skip that one and into the next one, all the way along. So when you're at the end, you've got your stitch, and you might just need to pull open that chain space there. So you'll do your chain 1 and you'll go in to that chain space. You'll go in to that top of that chain of 2. Your space is there. So we're just going to go in on this one into that space. Going to chain 2, 1, 2 and turn. So you're going to skip that first stitch and work in this space. Skip a stitch and go into the space. Skip the stitches and you're going into the chain spaces that you've made, like this. And this is what you get. You get this really pretty stitch. Some people call it the rice stitch. Some people just call it the moss stitch. But it's really pretty. Each country's got a different name for this. It's a really nice, compact, soft stitch. So it's beautiful for blankets for beginners. You can just do a great big blanket in this stitch. Make it into a throw for your bed, or you can put it on a stroller for your baby. So this is a really pretty stitch to do for beginners. It's really easy. And you're working into the chain space every single time. Please subscribe to the channel. Watch my other videos. There's lots of beginner videos on my channel and some very easy patterns for blankets that will suit the absolute beginner.